They chose a Sunday afternoon for it. That should have been my first warning. Sunday had always meant family, hamburgers on the grill, kids running barefoot through the grass. The kind of ordinary happiness you don't question because it feels earned. I arrived with a covered casserole dish balanced on one arm and a paper bag of fresh rolls under the other, still believing that word family meant something solid. I was wrong. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat like she was about to give a quarterly presentation. She waited until every chair was filled, until neighbors drifted closer pretending not to listen, until my grandson stopped tossing his football and stood still. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. Then she smiled. Everyone, thank you for coming, she said, holding up a glossy brochure. Elliot and I have been meaning to talk to you all about something important. About Walter. That's me. Walter Hayes, 71 years old, widower, founder of Hayes Industrial Services. 45 years of work etched into my hands and spine. She said my name the way people say issue. Walter's been living beyond his means, she continued. And after a lot of research, we've decided it's time he starts living more responsibly, more appropriately. 30 people turned to look at me. Not one spoke. I felt something tighten just below my throat, the place where pride and oxygen fight for space. She passed the brochures around like party favors assisted living facilities with smiling gray-haired couples and slogans about managed finances and simplified lifestyles. Elliot, my son, stood beside her nodding. My own blood, my own name on his birth certificate. He didn't look at me once. We're doing this because we love you, Dad, he said finally. We just don't think it's wise for you to keep living the way you are. I remember noticing the sound of the grill sizzling behind them, burgers burning while my life was being reorganized. I stood up slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that I had built everything they stood on. I just said, thank you. 2 words. Calm. Final. And in that moment, something inside me shut off like a breaker flipped in a dark room. My name is Walter Hayes, and I have spent my entire life building things that were meant to last. I started Hayes Industrial Services when I was 24 years old with a used cargo van, a secondhand welding rig, and a willingness to work hours that made other men quit. I learned machinery repair, fabrication, logistics, electrical systems, whatever the job demanded. If I didn't know it, I learned it. If I couldn't afford it, I built it. My hands still carry the proof. Burned scars, calluses that never softened, a finger that doesn't quite straighten from an accident in a steel yard 30 years ago. Honest marks from honest work. The company grew the slow way. 1 contract, then 5. 1 warehouse, then 3. Eventually, we serviced entire manufacturing parks across 2 states. I pay my people fairly. I kept my word. I never missed payroll, not once in 4 decades. And that's how I raised Elliot. He grew up in a shop, wearing oversized ear protection, handing me bolts, asking questions about machines that weighed more than our house. I taught him that work meant responsibility, that success meant remembering who helped you build it. When he went off to college, I was proud. When he graduated and told me he wanted to start his own business, something modern and digital, something bigger than manufacturing, I told him the truth. You build it right, or it collapses, I said. No shortcuts. He smiled and told me he understood. I believed him. 3 months later, he sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets spread across the oak surface I had built with my own hands. Charts, projections, words like scalability and market capture. He wanted to launch a logistics optimization firm consulting for companies that needed to streamline supply chains. I just need a little runway, he said. Banks are cautious. They don't get it yet. I saw what he couldn't. The hidden costs, the slow months, the contracts that fall apart after the handshake. I told him I'd support him. He thought I meant advice. I meant everything. Rebecca came into his life not long after. Sharp dresser, business degree, eyes that assessed before they smiled. She looked at my workshop the way people look at something outdated but functional. She never insulted me directly. She didn't have to. She called my work simple. She talked about elevating Elliot's image. She praised my effort with the tone people use when discussing hobbies. Elliot defended me at first, then less, then not at all. And when his business started struggling, when equipment leases cost more than expected and clients delayed payments, I did what I had always done for my family. I fixed it, quietly. What started as a one-time intervention became a system. Payments routed through holding entities. Guarantees signed in my name. Lines of credit backed by decades of reputation. 15 separate financial supports running every month. For 7 years. 105 payments total. They never asked where the money came from. They just assumed success was natural. Rebecca called Elliot brilliant. Elliot started believing it. And then, one Sunday afternoon, they decided I needed help managing my finances. They never knew what those two words "thank you" meant. Elliot never asked me for money outright. That's what made it easy. The first time his business hit trouble, he framed it as temporary. Equipment costs higher than expected. A contract delayed. Payroll tight for just 1 month. He said all the right things, the same things I had said to myself decades earlier when Hayes Industrial Services was barely keeping the lights on. "I've got a handle, Dad," he told me. Just one rough patch. But I recognized the look in his eyes. Pride wrestling panic. Confidence stretched thin over fear. The next morning, I made a phone call. Then another. I formed a holding company called Silvermark Holdings. Clean paperwork. Legitimate structure. Nothing flashy. Just a quiet channel through which I could help without humiliating him. The first transfer went through as a private investor contribution, $75,000 wired directly to Elliot's business account. He called me that night, excitement bubbling over. "You won't believe this," he said. "An investor found us. Loves our model. Says we're exactly what the market needs." I congratulated him. I didn't tell him I was the investor. That was how it started. Every time the business wobbled, Silvermark stepped in. When they needed updated servers, favorable lease terms appeared. When a client required additional bonding, an insurer suddenly felt comfortable. When payroll stretched thin, a consulting contract paid out early. Rebecca praised Elliot's instincts. Friends talked about his natural talent. He began giving advice to others, explaining how confidence attracted opportunity. He never noticed that opportunity always arrived exactly when disaster was about to. By the second year, his operation looked legitimate from the outside. Office space downtown. Staff. Equipment. Clients with recognizable names. What he didn't see was the scaffolding holding everything upright. I was co-signing leases he never read. I was backing insurance policies that would have bankrupted him without my name attached. I was guaranteeing supplier credit using relationships I'd built over 45 years. My accountant asked questions. "Walter," he said once, tapping a ledger, "this level of support is no longer emergency assistance. This is structural." "I know," I replied. I told myself it was temporary. That once Elliot found his footing, I'd step back. That one day he'd stand on his own. But success changes people slowly. Like rust. You don't see it until the metal gives way. Rebecca's tone shifted first. She stopped asking questions about my business and started offering suggestions. About my house, my truck, my clothes, about how retirement should look. Elliot followed her lead. He started talking about optimization and efficiency in ways that didn't include loyalty or memory. When I shared stories from the early days of my company, they smiled politely, like I was describing a trade that no longer existed. By the third year, I needed order. What I was doing had grown too complex to manage casually. I categorized everything. 15 monthly financial supports flowed quietly from Hayes Industrial Services and Silvermark Holdings into Elliot's world. Equipment leases, insurance premiums, credit guarantees, rent supplements, utility buffers, emergency operating funds, payroll backstops, vehicle leases, legal retainers, accounting services, technology subscriptions, marketing expenses, bonding coverage, seasonal cash flow bridges, tax escrow reserves. Every month, 12 times a year, for 7 years, 105 payments total, each one invisible, each one assumed. Elliot believed success was supposed to feel effortless. Rebecca believed they were smarter than everyone else. And I let them, because watching my son believe in himself felt worth the cost, because correcting him would have shattered the identity he was building. Because fathers sometimes choose sacrifice over recognition. But entitlement doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly. Dinner invitations stopped coming. Phone calls shortened. Advice for me became optional, then inconvenient. Rebecca began treating my opinions like relics from an earlier era. At a business anniversary party, she organized expensive restaurant. Polished guest Elliot gave a speech about perseverance and vision. He thanked his mentors, his colleagues, his wife. I was introduced as Elliot's father. He worked in manufacturing. No mention of Hayes Industrial Services. No acknowledgement of the foundation beneath their feet. I clapped politely. I told myself it didn't matter. But that was the night I realized something fundamental had shifted. They didn't just take my support for granted. They had forgotten it existed. And when people forget the ground beneath them, they start believing they can decide where others belong. The shift from distance to judgment didn't happen all at once. It arrived disguised as concern. Rebecca was the first to say it out loud. "Walter, have you ever thought about simplifying?" she asked one evening, glancing around my living room as if she were evaluating inventory. "This place is a lot to manage at your age." At your age, I smiled politely. I had learned that disagreeing only encouraged explanations. She meant well, she said. She was thinking long-term. Sustainability. Efficiency. Words she used often, always applied downward. Elliot backed her up. Not forcefully, not cruelly, just enough. "She's just worried about you, Dad," he said. "Things change. You don't want to fall behind." Fall behind what exactly, I wondered. My own life? Soon it wasn't just the house. It was my truck too large, too old-fashioned. My clothes too casual, not age-appropriate. My eating habits too early, too routine. My refusal to travel too rigid. Everything about me had become something that needed adjustment. Rebecca framed it as expertise. She had studied finance, after all. She understood modern money. She talked about passive income streams and lifestyle alignment as if I'd stumbled into old age without preparation. The irony sat heavy in my chest, because while she critiqued my spending, I was paying for hers. She carried handbags that cost more than my first year's profit. Elliot joined clubs whose fees were covered by credit lines I had guaranteed. Their mortgage existed because my name reassured a bank officer who had known me for 3 decades. But they didn't know that. And because they didn't know, they believed something dangerous. They believed I needed them. The first real confrontation came during what Rebecca called a planning session. She arrived with a laptop and spreadsheets, charts tracking my expenses, columns labeled optimization opportunities. She spoke gently, like someone explaining a difficult concept to a child. "Walter, your spending patterns don't align with typical retirement profiles," she said. "We're concerned you might be living beyond your means." I looked at Elliot. He nodded solemnly. "We just want to help you avoid problems later," he said. "Rebecca's really good with this stuff." They suggested downsizing, assisted communities, places with financial oversight, structured living. I listened quietly. All the while, I knew that without my monthly support, their business would last less than 2 months. I was funding their certainty while they diagnosed my incompetence. That was when concern became threat. They weren't just judging me. They were planning for me. The invitation came a week later. "Family barbecue," Elliot said. "Everyone's coming." Everyone. I should have recognized the warning. Rebecca didn't like large gatherings unless they served a purpose. Still, I miss my family. I miss believing I belonged somewhere. So I went. I brought food. I brought patience. I brought the version of myself that still hoped this was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Rebecca waited until every relative had arrived, until chairs were filled, until I was surrounded by people I had helped, housed, loaned to, employed. Then she stood up. She spoke clearly, confidently, like someone delivering a solution. "Walter's been struggling to manage his finances responsibly," she said. "We think it's time he lives more comfortably within appropriate limits." Brochures appeared. Assisted living, financial supervision, managed lifestyles. 30 people watched. No one objected. Elliot stood beside her, nodding. I realized then that whatever respect I thought I still had was gone, replaced by pity, by authority, by a narrative where I was the problem to be solved. I felt something inside me shut down. Not anger, not sadness. Resolution. I stood. I smiled. I thanked them. And when I walked away, I understood something with perfect clarity. They had just made it necessary for me to stop saving them from themselves. I drove home alone. The radio stayed off. I didn't need noise. I needed stillness, the kind that lets truth settle without argument. My house felt different when I walked in. Not lonely clarified, like a place that finally understood it was no longer a meeting hall for compromise. I set the empty casserole dish in the sink and went straight to my study, the room where Hayes Industrial Services had been born, expanded, and survived 4 economic downturns. I turned on the desk lamp. Then I opened the filing cabinets. 7 years of quiet sacrifice waited for me there. Neatly labeled folders. Contracts, bank statements, guarantees, insurance riders, lease agreements, letters bearing my signature on pages Elliot had never read. I spread them across the desk the way I used to spread blueprints before major build. Systematic, methodical, honest. I didn't rush. I counted 15 recurring financial supports every month for 7 years. Equipment leasing alone had crossed $300,000. Insurance subsidies and bonding coverage had swallowed another $210,000. Operating expense infusions rent, utilities, technology stood just shy of $400,000. Emergency payroll coverage added $85,000. Vehicle leases, legal retainers, accounting contracts, marketing support, tax escrows, seasonal buffers together, they pushed the total higher still. When I finished adding, the number sat there without drama. $1,568,000. That was the real cost of Elliot's confidence, of Rebecca's certainty, of their belief that success simply followed intelligence. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They had asked me to live within my means. They were right, just not in the way they imagined. The next morning, I made my first call. Jim Carlisle answered on the second ring. He'd been my attorney for over 20 years, drafted my wills, structured my acquisitions, protected my company when competitors failed. Jim, I said, I need to begin dissolving several long-standing financial arrangements. There was a pause. Then, this sounds personal. It is, I said, but it's also overdue. We reviewed the architecture I had insisted on years earlier. Exit clauses, termination rights, guarantee withdrawal provisions, language designed to protect me if circumstances changed. Most of these can be unwound with 30 to 60 days notice, Jim said. Some immediately. Start with the immediate ones. The second call went to my banker. Patricia knew my voice the way people recognize weather patterns. I need to cancel all automatic payments and guarantees connected to Silvermark Holdings and any entities linked to Elliot's firm. I told her. She pulled up the accounts. Walter, that's extensive. I'm aware. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She didn't ask again. By noon, the first supports were scheduled to end. Equipment leases, insurance backing, credit assurances. I didn't call Elliot. There was nothing left to explain. The third call was to my accountant. The fourth to my insurance broker. The fifth to leasing companies that had trusted my name more than Elliot's balance sheet. Each conversation was calm, professional, final. I wasn't angry. I was precise. That afternoon, I organized the cancellations into phases. Visible supports first, the kind that would create questions but not panic. I wanted reality to arrive gradually, to be undeniable, not theatrical. By evening, nearly $500,000 in annual support had been withdrawn. The foundation hadn't collapsed yet, but the cracks had begun. I slept well that night, better than I had in years. Because for the first time since Elliot sat at my kitchen table with his dreams spread before him, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's illusions. I was finally living within my means. And I was just getting started. The second phase required patience. Anyone can pull a plug. What matters is understanding what happens after the lights go out. On Wednesday morning, I carried 3 boxes of documents into Jim Carlisle's office. The receptionist glanced at the labels and raised an eyebrow. Jim didn't. He already knew what kind of day this was going to be. We spread the paperwork across the conference table. Years of agreements layered carefully, one atop the next, like framing hidden behind drywall. Jim adjusted his glasses and began reading. "Walter," he said finally, "you realize what you built here." "I do now." Silvermart Holdings was never just an investor. It was a controlling entity. A silent senior partner with authority written clearly into contracts Elliot had signed without reading past the signature lines. Partnership agreements, asset ownership schedules, intellectual property clauses, equipment titles, insurance beneficiaries. By structure, Jim said, tapping the documents, Elliot's company is effectively a subsidiary. You retain majority control of all critical assets. That was news to Elliot. It wasn't news to me. I had insisted on those terms from the beginning. Not because I wanted control, but because I understood risk. Because I had watched men lose everything by trusting optimism instead of documentation. "Proceed," I told Jim. He nodded. "We'll invoke dissolution clauses in stages. Immediate terminations where allowed. Formal filings for the rest." By the end of the meeting, legal notices were drafted. Some will be delivered within days. Others would take weeks to fully unwind. All of them were irreversible. The next calls went out that afternoon. To the bonding agency. To the commercial insurer. To the credit facilities backed by my reputation. Each withdrawal peeled away another layer of certainty Elliot didn't know he depended on. By Thursday, letters were already in transit. Certified. Formal. Written in language designed to remove emotion from consequence. That was when the phone call started. Not to me. To Jim. Elliot had received notice that a line of credit had been frozen pending guarantor verification. A leasing company wanted updated security deposits. Insurance premiums were being recalculated without my backing. Jim relayed the messages calmly. "He's confused," Jim said. "Assumes it's an error." "It isn't," I replied. On Friday morning, I authorized the final and most consequential action. The primary business loan. Nearly $400,000 in outstanding principal. Guaranteed by Hayes Industrial Services collateral. Structured with recall provisions that required immediate action if backing was withdrawn. Patricia hesitated when I asked. "This will trigger a payment demand," she said. 30 days. I understand. And if they can't refinance, then they'll learn something important. That same afternoon, I terminated the payroll contingency account. $75,000 reserved for emergencies, quietly refilled every year without Elliot's knowledge. The safety net disappeared. By the time the sun set, every invisible support structure was either gone or in the process of vanishing. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. That night, I packed 2 suitcases, a box of photographs, my father's tools, decades of company records. Everything else could remain where it was. Possessions lose meaning when they stop representing stability. I had purchased a small place months earlier, a cabin tucked into the high country, surrounded by pine and silence. Paid in full, owned through a trust that kept my name off public filings. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't explain myself. I simply locked the door of the house where I had raised my son and drove away before dawn. The mountains didn't ask questions. The air was clean. The mornings quiet. No cell service. No internet. Just time. By Monday, the first letters reached Elliot's desk. By Tuesday, the questions became urgent. By Wednesday, the truth began to surface. And by the time he realized what had been holding him up all along, the man who built it was already gone. The first sign that something was truly wrong did not arrive with drama. There were no raised voices, no alarms, no urgent knocks at the door. It came instead disguised as inconvenience paperwork, the dull hum of administrative friction that successful people are trained to ignore. Elliot would later describe it to Jim as annoying, but ordinary. He would say this carefully, with the benefit of hindsight, aware that ordinary was not the truth so much as the mass truth had worn at the beginning. At the time, it felt beneath notice. It was Monday morning, just after 9. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier toner, the usual background scent of productivity. The HVAC unit rattled intermittently, struggling against the heat already building outside. Phones rang in the distance. Someone laughed near the break room. The company was awake, functioning, intact. Elliot sat at his desk reviewing a proposal for a regional client mid-sized reliable, the kind of account that didn't make headlines but paid salaries. He had already skimmed it once and was rereading sections more out of habit than necessity, underlining phrases he already knew he would approve. When a knock came, it was soft. Just once. Before he could answer, the door opened. Karen stepped inside. That alone should have registered as unusual. Karen was a rule follower. She respected doors, hierarchies, calendars. She had been Elliot's office manager since the company's third year, hired during a period when they were still pretending to be smaller than they were. She had the instincts of someone who survived chaos by imposing order on it. Color-coded spreadsheets, reminders set weeks in advance, notes written in a neat, almost architectural hand. She never entered without permission. She was holding a single envelope, white, heavier than it needed to be. The paper had a stiffness that suggested legal significance, the kind of stationery designed to feel official even before it was opened. "This came in the morning mail," she said. Her voice was neutral, but her grip was tight, thumb pressing into the paper as if it might slide away if she relaxed. Her shoulders were squared, posture rigid. Karen did not bring things like this casually. Elliot glanced at the return address and smiled. "Equipment leasing," he said. "Probably another renewal reminder." He said it lightly, almost cheerfully, the kind of comment meant to reassure both of them. Karen didn't smile back. "It's addressed to you personally," she said, "and it mentions a guarantor." The word landed awkwardly between them. Elliot laughed, a quick reflexive sound that surprised even him. "There's been a mistake," he said easily, waving a hand. "My father wouldn't change anything without telling me." That sentence, "my father," wouldn't have been true for most of Elliot's adult life. Or at least, it had felt true. His father had always been the silent constant in the background of his success. Not involved in day-to-day operations, not present at meetings, but there when it mattered. When a lease needed signing. When a bank hesitated. When an insurance underwriter asked uncomfortable questions. Support without commentary. Help without conditions. A stabilizing force that never demanded explanation or acknowledgement. Elliot had never asked how it worked. He had never needed to. He had built his confidence on that reliability, the way one builds a house assuming the ground will stay where it is. You don't test the earth beneath your foundation every morning. You trust it. You build upward. Karen lingered in the doorway, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Do you want me to dash?" "I'll take care of it," Elliot said, already opening the letter. She hesitated another beat, then nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind her with unusual care. The office noise rushed back in. Elliot scanned the page. The language was polite, professional, impeccably calm. It referenced a withdrawal of guarantor support and requested immediate confirmation of replacement security to avoid a breach of lease terms. The words were measured, almost apologetic, as if the company regretted the inconvenience of enforcing reality. Elliot read it once, then again. He smiled, shook his head, and set it aside. People made mistakes. Systems misfired. Names got crossed, files misfiled. This was the sort of thing that happened when organizations grew, when layers multiplied. He would call someone later. It would be corrected. By noon, the laughter was gone. The bank call came first. A junior account manager someone knew. Someone whose voice carried the brittle confidence of a script explained that Elliot's operating line of credit had been temporarily frozen pending verification of recent changes to the guarantor structure. Temporary, she emphasized. Procedural. "It's just a formality," she said too quickly. "Once we confirm updated documentation, we'll restore access." Elliot thanked her, hung up, and sat very still. He opened his banking app. The available balance stared back at him, unchanged but suddenly menacing, like a ceiling that had lowered imperceptibly overnight. Then came the vendors. One email, then another. Two long-standing suppliers placed accounts on hold until further notice. No accusations, no explanations, no hostility, just distance. It was the financial equivalent of people stepping away from a crack forming in the ice not running. Not panicking, just instinctively widening the space between themselves and potential collapse. The insurance agent's voicemail arrived mid-afternoon. "Hi, Elliot, just wanted to make you aware that premiums are being recalculated based on updated risk exposure. We'll need to review coverage levels before renewal. Updated risk exposure. The phrase stuck with him. It was vague enough to be meaningless and specific enough to be terrifying. Elliot sat at his desk long after the office emptied. The glow of his monitor reflected faintly in the glass of the window behind it. Outside, the city moved on, traffic flowing, lights flickering on in other buildings, people leaving work without knowing anything had changed. He stared at the screen without seeing it. He called his father's house line and let it ring until voicemail answered. The message was generic, recorded years ago. His father's voice calm, familiar, steady. He didn't leave a message. There was no urgency yet. Not really. Just confusion. A sense that he would sound foolish if he overreacted. He gathered his things, shut down his computer, and left. That night, at dinner, Rebecca waved it off. They were sitting at their kitchen table, the one they'd bought when the company crossed its first million in revenue. Solid wood. Expensive. Chosen deliberately as a marker of arrival. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional distant sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. Administrative noise, Rebecca said, spearing a piece of chicken with more force than necessary. These things happen when businesses scale. She spoke with the authority of someone who had built her career on perception. Control, to Rebecca, was not something you possessed, it was something you projected. If you acted certain, certainty followed. Clients calmed. Market stabilized. Crises shrank. She had spent years convincing companies and herself that narrative was a form of power. Elliot wanted to believe her. He nodded, though the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her grip firm. "You're fine," she said. "We're fine." She still believed that confidence could bend reality. Tuesday erased that illusion. The certified letter arrived mid-morning. The delivery man waited while Elliot signed for it, his expression politely blank. The envelope was thick, the paper inside heavy, official in a way that could not be ignored. Elliot didn't open it right away. He carried it back to his office, closed the door, and sat down. The loan recall was absolute. 30 days. Immediate repayment or refinancing required. No hedging language. No reassurance. No suggestions for negotiation. Just terms. Deadlines. Consequences. Elliot read the first page, then the second. He read the same paragraph again and again, as if repetition might soften it, might reveal some hidden contingency clause he'd missed. His name appeared multiple times, spelled correctly, printed in ink that did not care about his shock, his confusion, his sense of betrayal. He tried calling his father. The house line was disconnected. He stared at his phone, frowned, and tried again. Same result. He dialed his cell. A recorded message informed him that the subscriber was no longer available. Not unavailable. Not out of service. No longer available. He sent an email. It bounced back undelivered. By the end of the hour, confusion had hardened into something colder. Fear, yes, but also something sharper. Something like humiliation. By Wednesday morning, panic set in. Rebecca took command. She cleared the dining room table with brisk efficiency, stacking mail, pushing aside decorative items, transforming the space from domestic comfort into a war room. "Bring me everything," she said. "Formation papers, contracts, banking records, everything." Her voice was sharp now, clipped. The warmth she used with clients was gone, replaced by precision. This was her element: crisis management, information control, strategic response. Elliot watched her move, both grateful and ashamed. He had always admired her certainty. Now he leaned on it. Boxes appeared from closets they hadn't opened in years. File folders thick with dust. Documents he remembered signing but not reading, trusting that structure and success were interchangeable. They worked in silence at first. Paper slid across the table. Pages flipped. Highlighters clicked open and shut. Then the names began to surface. Silvermark Holdings. Trust entities. Limited partnerships buried beneath layers of legal language Elliot vaguely remembered skimming, nodding through meetings, assuming complexity meant competence. Rebecca paused over one document, eyes narrowing. "Elliot," she said slowly, "did you know this entity existed?" "No," he said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. She flipped another page. "And this?" "No." Her voice changed as she read further, the confident cadence flattening into something more cautious. "This isn't just funding," she said. "This is ownership." The words landed with physical weight. They followed the trail through bank statements, spreadsheets, and filings. Transfers timed perfectly around crises Elliot barely remembered. A near-missed payroll in year 2, a sudden expansion opportunity in year 4, a lease approval that had felt like a miracle at the time. Each rescue now revealed itself as leverage. 7 years of support. Quiet. Consistent. Unquestioned. $1,568,000. By Thursday, the consequences became visible. An equipment truck arrived unannounced, the driver holding a repossession notice as if it were a receipt. Vendors demanded deposits they couldn't afford. Payroll checks bounced when the contingency account vanished, an account Elliot had assumed was simply there, like gravity. Employees noticed. Questions spread in whispers. Then in direct conversations, Elliot couldn't escape. His receptionist resigned quietly, leaving a polite note thanking him for the opportunity. 2 junior consultants updated their resumes during lunch, not bothering to hide their screens. Rebecca called clients, voice steady but brittle, assuring them everything was under control. It wasn't. Rumors move faster than facts, especially when certainty collapses. By Saturday morning, the truth was unavoidable. Rebecca found the original partnership agreement tucked behind old tax returns, a document they had never bothered to read closely because it had never seemed necessary. The clause was unmistakable. Senior partner, majority authority, unilateral dissolution rights. She sat down hard, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "He owns everything," she whispered. Or he did. Elliot stared at the paper, at his own signature, at the quiet realization that success had never been effortless, just subsidized. They had built their lives on a foundation they didn't know existed. And the man who laid it had already walked away. The envelope arrived on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that once would have meant errands, lunches out, or casual plans made without checking bank balances first. Those afternoons used to feel infinite, unstructured, disposable. They were the hours Rebecca once filled without thought, wandering through stores she didn't need anything from, lingering over menus she didn't read prices on, scheduling brunches that blurred into dinners because nothing urgent ever waited on the other side of them. But this Saturday was different. It was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as though the world itself had stepped back to make room for something that needed to land cleanly. It did not come by regular mail. It came by courier. A knock at the door, firm, deliberate, professional. Not rushed, not casual, not apologetic the way grocery deliveries had become. This knock did not ask permission. It announced itself. Rebecca felt it in her chest before she heard it again with her ears. She stood slowly, every instinct telling her that whatever waited on the other side of the door would not be improved by delay. Fear had become familiar over the past year, but this was sharper, focused. When she opened the door, the courier stood exactly where he should, neutral posture, uniform pressed, tablet already lit. "Signature required," he said. "Not delivery for. Not a you, Rebecca. Not sorry to bother you. Just a statement of fact." Her name looked strange when she signed it, like handwriting she no longer recognized as her own. Her hand trembled, not violently, not enough to draw comment, but enough that she noticed. Enough that she felt exposed by it. The courier didn't look twice. He never did. He turned, walked back down the path, and left with him the last illusion that this was just another package. Another piece of mail among many. Another interruption. Rebecca remained in the doorway longer than necessary, the envelope hanging at her side, its weight disproportionate to its size. It wasn't large. No logos. No legal stamps. No warnings printed in red. Just thick paper, cream-colored, expensive enough to signal intent without ostentation. The return address stopped her breath. Jim Carlisle's law office. Clean, neutral, professional, final. She closed the door and leaned her forehead against it for a moment longer than she'd planned to. The wood was cool, solid, unforgiving. She did not open the envelope right away. Instead, she carried it with both hands to the kitchen table. Elliot was already there. His laptop sat closed in front of him, not asleep, not charging, just closed like a habit that no longer served a purpose. His hands were folded together, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. He had been staring at the same spot on the table for several minutes before Rebecca entered the room. The house felt hollow now, too quiet. No music playing in the background. No assistants asking clarifying questions. No phones buzzing with calendar alerts. No vendors following up. No clients demanding timelines or reassurance or leverage. There was nothing left to ask. Rebecca set the envelope between them. They both stared at it as if it might move. "What is it?" Elliot asked. His voice was calm, but the effort it took to keep it that way was audible. Rebecca shook her head. "I don't know," but she did. They both did. They had been waiting for this moment without naming it, waiting for something definitive enough to puncture the limbo they'd been living in since the money stopped. Waiting for retaliation, litigation, a demand, an explanation, something loud enough to match the magnitude of what had happened. Instead, there had been silence. A silence that stretched for months, then a year. And now this. Finally, Rebecca broke the seal. The sound was small, controlled, almost polite. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. No letterhead, no legal formatting, no signature block, just handwriting. Steady, measured, unapologetic, familiar in a way that cut deeper than anger ever could. Rebecca recognized it immediately. She had seen on birthday cards, holiday notes, graduation checks, post-it reminders left on kitchen counters during visits. The loops, the spacing, the deliberate pressure of someone who wrote the way he spoke clearly, without excess. She unfolded the paper carefully, as if haste might somehow alter what was written. Her eyes scanned the words once, then again. Then she read aloud. "I have taken your advice and begun living comfortably within my means. I hope you can learn to do the same." That was all. No explanation, no accusation, no justification, no questions, just truth. The kind that does not seek agreement. The kind that does not ask permission to exist. The kind that cannot be argued with because it isn't an argument at all. Elliot stared at the paper. Not at Rebecca. Not at the table. Not at anything else. As if the letters might rearrange themselves if he looked long enough. As if a hidden paragraph might emerge beneath the ink. As if context might soften the edges. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He knew the handwriting better than anyone. It had written his first job reference. His college congratulations. Notes slipped into his childhood lunchbox, folded small enough to fit beside a sandwich, reminding him to work hard and be kind. "He's not coming back," Elliot said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca didn't argue. She didn't need to. She understood now. This wasn't leverage. It wasn't punishment designed to extract apologies or promises or public contrition. It was closure, the kind that doesn't slam, the kind that clicks. And once it does, it locks from the inside. The months that followed were brutal. Not dramatic, not explosive. No courtroom scenes or shouting matches or public reckonings. Just relentless. The kind of hardship that arrives quietly each day and stays long enough to exhaust every excuse. They sold the house first. It was inevitable. There was too much equity tied up in a mortgage they could no longer justify without assistance that was no longer coming. The realtor was polite, efficient, and unsentimental. The house sold quickly, faster than Rebecca expected. It was still desirable, still impressive, still everything they had once believed proved something. During showings, strangers walked through rooms Rebecca had once curated as statements of success. They opened closets, commented on square footage, asked about heating costs and property taxes. They saw possibility. Rebecca saw liability. When the sale closed, she cried. Not because she loved the house, but because selling it meant admitting fully, finally, that they had never earned it alone. Then came the cars. luxury models that had once felt necessary. Strategic, image-driven. Clients noticed those things. Appearances reassured people who were themselves insecure. Now the cars were assets to be liquidated. Then the furniture. Pieces chosen to impress rather than endure. Tables too heavy to move without help. Chairs that looked beautiful but never quite fit the body. Art selected to match walls rather than meaning. Each item sold stripped another layer of identity. Elliot shut down the firm before the end of the year. There were forms to file, notices to send, accounts to close. A decade of ambition collapsed into boxes labeled records and miscellaneous. Rebecca watched him pack late one night, a single desk lamp casting long shadows across bare walls. He moved slowly, carefully, as though speed might shatter something already fragile. She realized then that ambition doesn't disappear when it loses funding. It turns inward, and when it does, it's far more dangerous. They moved into a rental. Small. No yard. No room for illusion. The walls were thinner. The ceilings lower. The neighbors closer. Rebecca could hear someone else's television through the wall, another life, unfolding without regard for theirs. The first night, she lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, thinking about how much space silence had once taken up. 2 years later, Elliot runs a modest consulting operation above a hardware store. No employees, no investors, no guarantees, just honest work. The office smells of sawdust and paint. The stairs creak. The sign is modest. Clients come through referrals, not reputation. Every dollar is real. Rebecca works part-time. Real income. Real limits. No abstract budgets. No safety net disguised as generosity. Their marriage survived. But it changed. You cannot unknow dependence once it is exposed. You cannot return to arrogance after humility costs you everything. They argue less loudly now, but more honestly. As for me, I still live in the mountains. I wake with the sun. I build furniture with my hands, tables that don't wobble, chairs meant to last generations. Wood teaches patience, punishes shortcuts, rewards respect. I read. I breathe. I answer to no one but myself. I don't regret helping my son. I regret helping him without teaching him gratitude. They know where to find me. If they ever come, not as planners, not as judges, but as family. Some bridges can be rebuilt, but only when both sides understand the cost of burning them. People assume silence is empty, that it's a void, a punishment, a withdrawal. They imagine it as absence of sound, of presence, of relevance, as if what isn't spoken must be missing something essential. It isn't. Silence is where truth finishes its work. Truth doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need agreement. It doesn't need to convince. It only needs space. And silence is the only place spacious enough to hold it without distortion. When noise falls away, when the phones stop ringing, when no one is asking for guidance or approval or forgiveness, you're left with what can't be argued with. What remains doesn't negotiate. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't lie. It doesn't soften itself to be more palatable. It simply stands. Up here in the mountains, days move at a pace that doesn't acknowledge urgency. Time stretches without apology. The sun rises when it's ready. It doesn't care if you slept poorly or woke with regret. It doesn't accelerate because you're late to something or slow down because you're tired. It arrives, steady and indifferent, and leaves the same way. The wind comes and goes without explanation. Some mornings it moves through the trees like it has something to say, long, low sounds that travel through the valley and fade into nothing. Other days it doesn't move at all, and the stillness presses against your ears until you notice your own breathing, until you notice your heartbeat, until you realize how rarely you've been alone with either. Trees don't care what you once owned. They don't care who used to call you for help. They don't care how many people once depended on your decisions. They don't remember your name. They don't care about your resume. They don't measure your worth by what you produced or protected or provided. They stand where they stand because they grew there. They endure because they adapted. They don't justify themselves. That kind of indifference is calming. At first, it unsettled me. I was accustomed to consequence being immediate. A missed call mattered. A delayed response had weight. In my old life, Silence meant something was wrong, someone waiting, something failing, an expectation unmet. Silence was a warning sign, a red light, a problem demanding action. Here, silence just is. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't request. It doesn't escalate. And in time, I learned to let it be. That wasn't a decision I made all at once. It happened the way most real changes do, gradually, without ceremony. At first, I filled the quiet with thoughts, then with memories, then with explanations I no longer needed to give. Eventually, even those thinned out. What remained wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. I didn't come here with a plan to reinvent myself. I wasn't running from guilt or chasing peace in any romantic sense. I didn't need absolution. I needed perspective. I simply reached a point where noise no longer clarified anything. It only echoed what I already knew, louder and more insistently, without adding meaning. The move wasn't dramatic. No declarations. No goodbyes wrapped in speeches. No attempts to be understood. Just a decision made quietly, the way real decisions usually are after all the arguing is done. There's a moment in every life when the case is closed internally, even if no one else knows it yet. That was mine. I built a routine without meaning to. Not a schedule, a rhythm. Mornings begin with coffee on the porch. The mug warms my hands as steam lifts into cold air and disappears before it can settle anywhere. Some mornings the sky is a clean, unbroken blue, so clear it almost feels intentional. Other days it hangs low and gray, like it hasn't made up its mind yet. I watch the light change as the sun clears the ridge. I don't rush it. There's nowhere I need to be before it arrives. I used to measure mornings by what they demanded of me. Now I measure them by what they allow. When the weather turns sharp, I split wood. There's a satisfaction in the predictability of it, the weight of the axe, the sound of steel biting into grain, the clean crack when the log gives way. Wood doesn't pretend. If you strike poorly, it resists. If you strike cleanly, it yields. No resentment. No memory. The work is honest. Immediate. It doesn't carry yesterday into today. Later in the day, I work in a shop. It started as something to keep my hands busy. I'd brought tools with me out of habit more than intention. They were familiar, comforting in their weight and wear. But soon enough, shaping furniture from rough planks became the center of my days. Tables, chairs, shelves, things that serve a purpose and don't pretend to be more than they are. I like that about them. A table doesn't ask to be admired. It just needs to hold weight. A chair needs balance. A shelf needs to stay level. If it fails, the failure is obvious and honest. There's no committee to blame. No language to soften the truth. No one rewriting the story after the fact. The work reminds me of the early days before the company grew, before titles mattered more than competence, before meetings replaced making things. Back when success was measured by whether something worked, not by how it looked in a presentation. Back when effort still meant something visible. Sometimes, while I work, I think about Elliot. Not with anger, not even with sadness, with clarity. That surprised me at first. I expected bitterness to linger. I expected resentment to resurface when my hands were idle. But the mountains have a way of stripping emotion down to its essentials. What's unnecessary falls away. What's performative can't survive. What remains is understanding. I replay moments I once ignored. Small things. Easy things. The way gratitude faded as success grew. How help became expectation. How expectation hardened into judgment. How questions turned into critiques. How humility quietly exited the room without being noticed. I remember the pride I felt teaching him the trade. Showing him how to read people as much as numbers. How to listen in meetings without needing to speak. How to notice when someone was cutting corners not because they were dishonest, but because they were overwhelmed. I remember thinking that was enough. I taught him how to work, but I failed to teach him how to receive. That was my mistake. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought generosity spoke for itself. I believed that modeling values was enough, that if someone saw integrity long enough, they'd absorb it by proximity. That gratitude was natural. That loyalty was instinctive. I was wrong. Support without accountability creates blindness. Love without boundaries teaches entitlement. And silence, when used too long, becomes permission. I stayed quiet when I should have corrected. I smoothed things over when discomfort would have taught more. I let gratitude be optional because I didn't want to seem demanding. I mistook restraint for wisdom. In doing so, I taught him that what was given freely had no cost. That lesson doesn't age well. I don't hate Rebecca. That surprises people when they hear it, as if resentment is the only logical outcome. But hatred requires energy, and clarity doesn't fuel it. Hatred keeps you tethered to the very thing you claim to reject. She believed in systems and appearances because that's what her world rewarded. She mistook polish for stability, control for wisdom. She wasn't cruel by nature, just convinced of her own correctness. There's a difference. She trusted processes more than people because processes don't disappoint you personally. When something fails, you adjust the system. When a person fails, you have to sit with the discomfort of misjudgment. Rebecca avoided that discomfort expertly. She didn't see Elliot drifting because the metrics still looked good. Revenue grew. Clients stayed. The surface held. And when the surface holds, most people stop looking underneath. Elliot followed her because it was easier than questioning himself. That's how most people drift away from gratitude. Not through malice, but through comfort. Through the slow erosion of humility when success stops feeling borrowed and starts feeling earned. Comfort dulls curiosity. Certainty dulls listening. And entitlement rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as confidence. I see it clearly now because distance sharpens vision. I get letters sometimes. Not from them. From old employees. Former clients. Men who remember what Hayes Industrial Services stood for. They write about habits that still linger, the way meetings start on time, the way mistakes are owned quickly, the way junior staff are expected to speak up without fear. They tell me the shop still runs on principles I set decades ago, that my name still opens doors even when I'm not there to walk through them. That matters more than apologies. Apologies can be spoken without understanding. Legacy can't. Legacy is what continues when you're absent. It's what people repeat without being reminded. It's what survives reinterpretation, convenience, and time. I don't block forgiveness. I simply don't chase it. Forgiveness offered too early feels like permission to forget the lesson. And some lessons need to be remembered longer than they need to be resolved. People misunderstand that. They think withholding forgiveness is bitterness. They don't see the difference between punishment and patience. I'm not closing the door out of spite. I'm leaving it closed until the knock changes. If Elliot ever comes not to fix something, not to negotiate, not to explain, but to listen, I'll open the door. Listening isn't passive. It costs something. It requires surrendering the story you've rehearsed in favor of the truth you might not like. Until then, I live simply, within my means, not because I was forced to, but because I finally chose to. Simplicity clarifies what mattered all along. It reveals how much of life is maintenance of image, of expectation, of roles we didn't consciously accept. Here, I need less. And needing less makes room for more of what can't be bought. Some evenings, I sit by the fire and let the day settle. The crackle of burning wood fills the room. Shadows stretch along the walls. There's no television humming in the background. No updates to check. Just the steady rhythm of heat and quiet. I think about the man I was when everything was loud, when decisions were urgent and consequences immediate. He wasn't wrong. He was just unfinished. Silence finished him. It stripped away the parts that needed applause. It kept the parts that could stand alone. I don't know what the future holds. I don't need to. What remains after silence is enough. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like peace. People ask sometimes, at least a few who still know how to reach me, whether I feel lonely up here. It's an honest question. Loneliness is what people fear most when they imagine walking away from family, from history, from a life built around others. But loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of respect. And up here, surrounded by trees that don't flatter and mountains that don't care, I have never felt more accompanied by myself. I think back often to that Sunday afternoon, to the sound of chairs scraping the patio, to the weight of 30 silent faces watching a younger woman explain my life to me like a budget spreadsheet. I replay the moment I stood up. I remember how calm my voice sounded when I said thank you. At the time, I didn't fully understand why that was all I could say. I thought maybe age had softened me. Maybe I was tired of fighting. Now I know better. That wasn't weakness. That was clarity arriving all at once. There comes a point in a man's life when he realizes that explaining himself no longer serves a purpose. When defending his worth to people who benefit from forgetting, it only deepens the imbalance. Respect that has to be argued for is already gone. I didn't destroy my son's life. I stopped protecting him from reality. There is a difference, and it matters. Elliot had every opportunity to ask questions, to learn, to understand where stability came from. He chose comfort instead. He chose belief over verification. He chose praise over gratitude. And I allowed it because I thought shielding him was love. That was my final illusion. Love that erases consequence doesn't strengthen it, delays collapse. I see now that what I gave him wasn't support. It was insulation. And insulation, left too long, prevents growth. When the insulation disappeared, reality rushed in like cold air through broken walls. Painful, yes, but necessary. Up here, my days have weight again. Each one earned. Each one accountable. If I don't split the wood, the fire doesn't burn. If I don't fix the leak, it stays broken. There is no invisible hand catching mistakes. That honesty is peaceful. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit at the small table by the window and write letters I never sent. Not because I want to reopen wounds, but because writing keeps memory honest. I write about the early days, about Elliot as a boy, falling asleep in the truck while I drove home from job sites, about the first time he held a wrench like it mattered, about how proud I was when he told me he wanted more than what I'd built. I still am. Wanting more was never the problem. Forgetting who helped you reach it was. I don't know if Elliot will ever come here. I don't know if he's ready to face the version of himself that believed he was self-made while standing on another man's shoulders. But if he does come, there will be no lectures waiting for him. No accounting. No speeches about sacrifice. Just a chair on the porch. And silence. Silence does not accuse. It does not negotiate. It simply makes space for truth to arrive on its own terms. That is the lesson I learned too late, but not too late to live by. So if there's one thing I hope people understand when they hear my story, it's this. Support is a gift, not a guarantee. Success is a responsibility, not an entitlement. And respect, once lost, cannot be purchased back with regret. They told me to live within my means. I listened, and in doing so, I finally reclaimed something far more valuable than money. My dignity.